Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's session called Challenges for Solo Admins and How to Overcome Them. My name is Lauren Gibson, and I'm with Coastal Cloud, one of today's sponsors who provides Salesforce implementation and support services to nonprofit organizations. I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Mark Jones. Mark is the data coordinator for Oasis Community Housing, a nonprofit in the northeast of England. He is a solo admin with 5 years of Salesforce experience. He is the co-leader of the Salesforce user group in the northeast of England and is an impressive 2 times Trailhead Ranger. A recorded version of this webinar will be made available after nonprofit Dreamin. And just as a reminder, if you've already accepted audio and video settings, your camera may be on by default. I know you're probably looking forward to this presentation as much as I am, and we'd love to hear from you during the session. We'll monitor the chat for any questions and address as many as we can during the Q&A period at the end. And for those of you who are just joining us, welcome again to Challenges for Solo Admins and How to Overcome Them, presented by Mark Jones. Mark, I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thanks very much, Lauren, and hello everybody. Great to be here with you all. And it's just really good conference to be part of this, I think, isn't it? So I'm going to share my screen right now, and we'll get into the presentation. Okay, so I think you should be able to see that. So great, it's on screen. So as I mentioned, this is the session around challenges for solo admins and how to overcome them. And just as we begin, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsors for allowing us to run this event. Without the sponsors that we've got for the event, this wouldn't be happening in the way that it is. So I want to say a big thank you to every single sponsor that we have. As we mentioned, a little bit about me, so you know about myself. As has been mentioned, I am the sole admin for UK nonprofit Oasis Community Housing. I've been in my post as a solo admin for 4 years, but have 5 years overall experience. All of my Salesforce experience, employment-wise, has been within the nonprofit sector, and I've been doing that since 2016. I co-lead the Salesforce user group in the northeast of England, which is predominantly based in the Newcastle upon Tyne area. I've also spoken at a few different conferences now, with this being my third. We're speaking at Inspire East in 2019, in the X-Force Data Summit in 2020. And as of this month, I'm a 2-time Trailhead Ranger, and I've been previously a Trailhead mentor. And at the moment, I am actually on the list to be a mentor again, just waiting to be linked up with a mentee. So a little bit about this session. My aim is to cover 5 challenges that solo admins often face. So this session will be beneficial to you if you are a solo admin working in a non-profit organization, or any organization for that matter, as most of these principles relate to the role of a solo admin. And also if you're a manager of a solo admin as well, it'll give you a little bit of insight into some of the challenges that we face as solo admins. If time persists at the end, there will be time for questions. And basically, I would like to answer them as many as I can. If we can't get to those questions, you can find me on on Twitter or LinkedIn. This is Mark Jones, and if you use the hashtags that are on screen, which are nonprofit Dreamin and challenges for solo admins, you can feel free to post questions on Twitter as well. And I'm going to be writing a blog post coming up where those questions will be answered. But moving on. So the first challenge I want to talk about is the fact that solo admins are on their own, hence the title, Solo Admins. As a solo admin, you'll be the only person responsible for managing your Salesforce org in a technical capacity. So that means that you essentially are the one doing everything, which goes into our next challenge that's coming up. There's some real good positives about being on your own, but it can also be quite difficult for users. So one of the main positives about being on your own can be you get the freedom essentially to kind of try stuff out in sandboxes. You get the kind of experiment a little bit more, and you're the only person who's making those decisions. But in terms of being on your own, some of the difficulties really come in the fact that if you face any difficulties, if you have any frustrations or any challenges, you don't really have that person in your organization to talk about those two at a similar level. In my experience, if I've wanted to say I have a bit of a little bit of a vent at something that I'm trying to figure out, something that's not quite going right, oftentimes the things that I struggle with go over the heads of the people that I could potentially talk to in my organization, because they don't work with Salesforce in the same way that I do. So how can we overcome this challenge? Well, the solution's on the screen here, as you can see, and these are some ideas. All of the solutions that I raise here, you could probably think of some yourself that I might have missed. This is not in any means an exclusive list, an exhaustive list. This is my opinions and my observations from over the years. But some things you can do is you can join a Trailblazer community group, or if there isn't one in your area, you can set one up. That's what I do at the Newcastle user group, the Northeast group that I co-lead now. There wasn't one in the area, so I simply decided to investigate that, looked into the Trailblazer community program, and started one up of my own, because I thought that if I was struggling with this kind of thing, and there was going to be other people in the same kind of boat. And as it turned out, there was, so it was able to do that. Other things you can do, you can use social media to your benefit. There's loads of great people on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on various other social media platforms, you can look to connect to and build those relationships up with, and to talk to about the things that you're wanting to figure out, the things that you're trying to learn, or just simply want to share best tips and practices. The Salesforce community on social media is very big, so why not have a look and connecting with people online? You can follow some great blogs and YouTube channels and engage with the content there. And there's a load of great content out there, as I say. If you look at things like blogs, Salesforce Ben is one that I would highly recommend. And there's a load of fantastic content out there. Far too much to mention in the short time that we have here this morning, this afternoon, or whatever time it is where you are. So challenge 2 is the one where we as solo admins do everything. Being in our roles that we end up being the de facto administrator, the de facto developer, the de facto business analyst, and whatever role that the organization that you're in would currently fulfill in terms of how they use Salesforce. You do everything. You wear all the hats, or in the case of the image you can see on the screen, like Joey and Friends, you wear all of the different shirts that you can associate with your role. So how I would approach this challenge is to work through the constraints that you have on your time. You could look to do things like empower your end users to take a bit more responsibility. That could be around things on the record level. That could be in things such as like managing access to report folders, and so on and so forth. But empower some of your end users to take a bit more responsibility. That can take one extra thing off your plate that you don't need to necessarily have to manage and maintain yourself. You're going to set aside some focus time to look at the bigger tasks in your plate, and you can also potentially look for volunteers to assist in your work. But if you're going to look for the volunteers side of things, one thing I would say to you is to make sure that your policies and procedures allow for this first. Make sure everything within your GDPR policies, everything within your IT access policies will allow for volunteers to work with your Salesforce org. And if they don't, work with the people that you need to work with who put together your policies and procedures to ensure that is the case. So moving on to challenge number 3 is a one that is quite notable, I think, within the non-profit sector at times, and that is that solo admins often find themselves in a position where they need to do more work than they are contracted to just in order to cope with their workload. This does mean by default that you end up being underpaid if that's the case, because you would normally be paid for the hours that you work. But one thing I would say on the money side of things on this is that if you're working in the non-profit sector, your chances are you're probably not really working in your organization for the money as your primary purpose for being there. Lots of us in the non-profit sector work where we do because we really believe in the vision of the organization that we're working for, and we want to contribute in the way that we can, with the skills that we can bring to the table uniquely to help the organizations that we're in really make a difference. But this is a challenge that we do often find, that you having to do more work than you have the capacity to. And so there's things that you can do around this, like with the challenges that I've mentioned. So if you're part-time, for example, like I'm currently part-time in my role, you can work on campaign to actually work the hours that you actually put in behind the scenes. So at the moment, I say I work in a part-time role, but if I look at my hours that I realistically do, it's probably full-time, although I officially do part-time hours. So campaign to work for what you actually be contracted for, what you actually do. And with that, there's things you can do. You can prepare some evidence showing the amount of work that you do. You could potentially suggest a plan to create a Salesforce team in your organization. That would obviously result in potentially you not being a solo admin anymore. But if your organization is big enough to warrant it, then that is something you can look at doing. If you're going to propose implementing a team to manage the Salesforce org in your company, prepare good reasoning for that and show those kind of evidences in the plans that you put together and the research that goes into that. And one thing which is easier said than done, but it's something that I hear all the time from my line managers, is aim to stick to your hours and only your hours so that you can have a good work-life balance. That's just a good principle for well-being. But again, for us in the solo admin realm of things, it's easier said than done. But that's a good thing to strive towards if we can do it. The fourth challenge I want to raise is around our own skills and development. And I asked the question at the beginning of this slide here that you can see on screen: have you been in the position when you get stuck on something in Salesforce? If I was to ask you if you're doing that, how many of you would raise your hands if we could see each other on the screen? I know I certainly would. So with that, all Salesforce professionals get stuck from time to time with things. But when this happens with solo admins, it can easily become a bit of a mountain in our own eyes. We've already got a ton of work to do, and we have to try and prioritize everything very, very strictly in order to get things done well and efficiently. Solo admins don't necessarily have the same foundation for getting help from other professionals that you would do if you're part of a team. So this place of training can be quite a difficult one for us, especially if there isn't a viable plan in place for that. One experience that I had was one of my line managers mentioning around what kind of training we would do. And I spoke with them, proposed some ideas around pushing me towards certification. And their response was a bit unsure. They didn't know why certification was a good thing or not. And that's one thing you sometimes will find. You'll find that sometimes people that you work with may not understand the training needs that you have. And with that in mind, this is probably a good place for me to mention something I should have mentioned right at the beginning, and I've forgotten to, so apologies for that. But we do have a poll in the event chat for this session. And that poll asks the question, what do you struggle with most as a solo admin? And there's 3 options that you can ask on the poll. Enter the poll. And those 3 options are being on your own, the high volume workload, or time to learn and develop. So if you would like to answer that poll, if you just go to the event chat and go to polls, you'll see it you'll see for those watching stage B, what is your biggest challenge as a solo admin? But back to this particular slide. So as I said, the challenge here is around our skills and development and the time that we need to learn and develop our own. So how can we overcome this challenge? The answer to that, in my opinion, is to work towards building a good foundation for learning and training going forward. So you can do these kind of things by blocking out some time in your diary for your own development, and whether that is time each day or set time once a week or twice a week, however works for you. Encourage acquisition of certifications in your role. If your organization isn't already helping you work towards getting certifications. Again, similar to the first point, build good contacts within the ecosystem. You can use the Answers community to your benefit as well. And you can also, as mentioned in the first challenge, follow good Salesforce blogs, podcasts, vodcasts, and so on. Because we all need the time to work on our own learning and developing. And with this as well, one thing I would also suggest is using Trailhead to do your learning and development through. It is probably the best platform out there for Salesforce learning, but as well, there is a lot of other great content out there as well. The final challenge I want to mention is, as I've termed it, the usual challenges. And because as solo admins, we have to deal with some unique challenges of individually, but let's not forget we're in an organization working as admins. So we have all of the usual things on top of that. So that is things like users forgetting their passwords and emailing you every hour or so going, I've lost my password again, please can you reset it? It's challenges around user adoption, data integrity, records not being filled in correctly, staff not necessarily knowing when to fill what in when. And how I've kind of termed the solution for this one, because it is something that every admin deals with in some capacity or other, is simply not to give up. It's to work hard to ensure that your org is in a good place, both from a technical side and also from a data standpoint. You can help with this by looking into investing in some tools, so some good third-party apps like Duplicate Check, for example, and other tools that's out there on the App Exchange that can really help you really manage your org well. Work to get the operational side of things in line with the expectations surrounding data input and monitoring. And you may need input from senior management in those kind of areas as well, but just have a look at how you can get the operational side of things up to speed. So those are the challenges I wanted to mention, and we're now almost approaching the end of the session, so I'm going to pass over back on to Richard and Lauren to help me with answering some of these questions in a minute. But I just want to say Thank you for having me. We'll be taking questions, and as I mentioned, if we don't get the time to answer the question that you have, feel free to tweet me with and ask those questions there. And thank you for coming. As I said, there'll be a blog coming out probably next week, looking at these questions as well. So that's all that is from me. Once the session's finished, you'll be directed to what session, what's coming up next, and how you can get there. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point and look to answer these questions coming through.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for that.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
I can, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, a huge amount's gone on in the chat whilst you were talking. A lot of shout out for community groups. Obviously, I think everyone in the non-profit sector has taken part in some of the community groups. And if there isn't one in your area, you can do what Mark's done and look to open one of those up. There are a few shout outs for the Slack Ohana group, which is new to me, so I haven't taken part in that, but we're on Slack, so I'm going to instantly go and do that. In terms of questions, one of the most common questions was how you cope with wearing multiple hats. I think it was Seema that mentioned that although she's meant to be a Salesforce administrator, she's finding that she's pulled in every which direction. And a lot of people after that were saying that fundraising becomes, a secondary role for all Salesforce admins. So I guess the question there is how do you maintain that focus on moving the Salesforce implementation forward?
Yeah. So one of the things I'll put out there with answering any questions is I don't want to go with the usual kind of easy answer, which is it depends on what's going on. That's for us as admins and Salesforce in any role. The it depends answer is always true for us. But with this particular question of like how do I cope personally with wearing many hats? To be honest, that it does depend on what hat is on at that particular time and the workload that's going on. So if I've got quite a busy workload, it can be a bit more stressful. What I would say to recommend in terms of how to manage this well is, again, it's working through the time that you have, working through how you can prioritize those things that you're working on. So if you're working on, say, developing, say, like a very complex flow in your flow, how much time do you need to devote to that? And I would recommend prioritizing that time into that. Generally speaking, though, I do cope with it a lot better now than I did 2 or 3 years ago when I first started, because there was a lot going on and I was still learning. Something I would encourage people with is that you do learn over time a bit more organically how to cope with all of the different hats that you wear. But yeah, that's a great question. Hopefully I've answered that to some degree there.
Thanks, Mark. One of the other comments, well, there are two sides, comments and statements. So do you have any particular podcasts that you follow, Mark? There were a few shout outs generally to Salesforce Ben, but are there any you follow particularly?
Yeah, so I often listen to the Salesforce admin podcast that's out there in general, which is really good. The podcast I mainly listen to, though, to be quite honest, is the Mums on Cloud 9 podcast that's put together through Super Mums. Came across that through an event where I attended where Heather Black was speaking, and that's a really good podcast as well. Predominantly, I tend to watch more video stuff than I do listening to podcasts. So I often watch content from like Let's Play Salesforce, Salesforce Hulk, Salesforce Ben as well when their YouTube videos goes up. So I tend to watch more videos than listen to podcasts. But in terms of podcasts, yeah, so Mums and Cloud9 is one I would highly recommend personally.
Good stuff. Lauren, I think we're nearly out of time. Did you want to make any comments or ask any questions?
I just want to say thank you, Mark, for leading us. And I do think that the balancing multiple responsibilities is always a challenge. I like to think of the analogy of glass balls and rubber balls, and you're juggling them, and the glass balls are the ones that are probably priority and can't be dropped, whereas sometimes the rubber ones need to bounce for a little bit. So thank you so much. And I know your job is a day-to-day challenge, and I appreciate you.
Great. And thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Richard. And thank you, everybody, for being here. It's really been great to speak with you. And really hope to see you again virtually or in person at some point.
Good stuff.